Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure as Chair of the Board of Trustees of APEX Scotland to welcome you to our annual lecture. Behind you there's always the formal closing of the doors. It's a bit like the lobby of the House of Commons or something. So it pays to get here, I guess, on time. I'm delighted to welcome you once again to our annual lecture. I'm supposed to make any health and safety and housekeeping arrangements. As I can recall, the toilets are downstairs. There are fire escapes that away, and if a fire starts, just follow me, because I'll be moving fairly quickly. One of the things that's important for me to say here is that our annual report is now on the APEX website. A lot of work has gone into the report this year. I'm really pleased with the quality of it and the design. I think there's some introductory tasters in your pack, so please look at it and please take the opportunity to go onto the website. For somebody who's been involved with APEX as long as I have, it's very interesting to see how the organisation has changed and moved forward. As you know, after the Cabinet Secretary has given his lecture, he's agreed to respond to some questions, and we will have people with microphones who will be doing that. And just after the question session, the Chief Executive of APEX Scotland, Alan Staff, will close the event. Now, I'm particularly delighted to welcome Michael Matheson, MSP, here, the recently appointed Cabinet Secretary for Justice. I'm sure he doesn't feel that recently appointed, given the busy nature of the post. He's a native of Glasgow. His profession prior to going into politics was an occupational therapist. He completed his degree at Queen Margaret, and he has postgraduate qualifications and degree in social studies, applied social sciences as well. During his previous working career, he practiced as a community occupational therapist. Anyone from local authorities here knows what a valuable resource those are. I hope he felt valued because he was a colleague of mine with Central Regional Council more years ago than either of us probably wish to remember. He was elected MSP for Falkirk West following the 2007 elections. Prior to that, he was regional MSP for Central Scotland from 1999 to 2007, and was appointed Minister for Public Health and Sport and Vice Convener of the European and External Relations Committee. And he also sat on the Scottish Parliament's Health and Sports Committee and on the Justice, Enterprise and Culture Committees. He was appointed as Cabinet Secretary for Justice just under a year ago. So I would be delighted if you give a warm welcome to the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your warm welcome. And it's a pleasure to be able to join you here tonight. I was just saying to Brian, the last time I was in here, I met Prince Charles. And I know he's not here tonight, but my late father was with me because it was the opening of the Scottish Parliament when it used to just be up the road. And as Prince Charles was making his way around, all the guests there, saying hello to them, my father decided the guy who was with them should be approached. And I'll always remember my father going up to him saying, "So, are you his flunky?" And this poor chap saying, "Well, I wouldn't quite put it that way, sir." But it's a pleasure to be able to join you this evening, ladies and gentlemen, to also offer my thanks for your invitation to be able to offer this lecture tonight in what is absolutely splendid surroundings for such an event. My interests in justice didn't just come about since I became Cabinet Secretary for Justice last November. It's a matter of public record that my interest in justice matters has been long-standing. I was one of our party's opposition spokespersons in justice for a number of years, and I had at one point the pleasure of being the longest-serving member of the Parliament's then Justice Committee. I actually was on the Justice Committee for approximately 6 years. At one point, I actually thought that our party whips had forgotten that I still existed and I hadn't been shifted on to another committee. But I've always maintained a very strong and keen interest on areas in particular around sentencing policy and the way in which we run our prisons and how we can best deliver better outcomes for people who find themselves caught up in our justice system. And it's my pleasure tonight to be able to use this opportunity to lay out my vision of fairer justice for Scotland. Now, this afternoon, the First Minister launched our programme for government for 2015-16, and I'm sure that each and every one of you has now had the opportunity to read the document from cover to cover. But if you forgive me, I want to cover a few areas that you may already know about, and I want to start by pulling out some of the areas from the programme for government that was announced today, which I think are of particular interest. Our programme for government is about laying the foundations for the long term in order to equip Scotland for the challenges of the next decade and beyond. It's about making sure that we, as a government, use the powers at our disposal to deliver the best outcomes we can for the people of Scotland. And perhaps, most importantly of all, it's about reducing the inequality that still scars too many of the communities in our country. Inequality is a complex problem, and in many attempts to reduce it, we need to focus on the causes rather than the consequences of inequality. For me, this is an extremely important distinction, and one which raises questions about how we can best target our resources in order to achieve that. As many of you will know, my previous ministerial role in the Scottish Government was as Minister for Public Health. And during my time in that role, I saw firsthand how we as a nation often look towards our health service to address health inequalities. But in doing so, we forget that these inequalities are in fact driven by deep-seated social inequality. In this respect, I continue to be struck by what the health service and the justice system often have in common. Our most deprived communities are those most likely to experience poor health outcomes and also higher levels of crime. Therefore, if we are to be effective in reducing the number of people coming into contact with the criminal justice system, we also need to make sure that we focus in tackling social inequality within our communities. And in tackling social inequality, we also need to ensure that we do not cause further unintended polarisation. This is why I think it's extremely important that programmes such as the Cashback for Communities can assist us in helping to focus some of our efforts and resources on those areas and communities most in need. Both the health service and the justice system are responsible for dealing very often with the consequences of social inequality, but neither can provide the solution on their own. The root causes lie across a number of different spheres of public interest, and addressing them will require a collaborative approach, working across and beyond the government in itself. And I'm pleased to say that I think there are already some positive signs in this becoming more meaningfully recognised and addressed. Over the past 2 years, some of you may be aware that the Ministerial Group on Offender Reintegration has been looking at ways in which we can address the demand for better integration between the criminal justice system and our wider public services. The remit of this group was to identify and to direct activity across Scotland's public and voluntary sector, which would help to secure the successful reintegration of individuals serving short-term sentences back into our communities. Now, each minister on the group was called upon to consider their role and the need to address more effective reintegration of individuals leaving custody and how that could be influenced by their own portfolio area. I was a member of that group throughout its existence because I was a health minister that was appointed to the group, and I then subsequently ended up chairing the group as a Cabinet Secretary for Justice. The group met on 5 separate occasions from October 2013 and through to June 2015. And I believe that we're already seeing some of the benefits of this particular group's work. We heard evidence, for example, that people coming out of prison rely on key public services and third sector organisations to help them address a range of basic practical requirements, and that failing to do so in a timely manner was likely to hinder their ability to reintegrate into the community. We also heard that release on the days preceding weekends and public holidays was a key barrier to accessing wider services in the community on release. And to make matters worse, around 40% of all liberations from custody were on Friday or Thursday preceding a public holiday. We were, in effect, setting people up to fail. The ministerial group agreed that this was an area which we should take steps in addressing. We agreed that legislation should be introduced to provide the Scottish Prison Service with greater flexibility over release dates, and as a way of avoiding the disproportionate number of Friday liberations. We have delivered on this particular commitment already. The Prisoner Control of Scotland Act 2015, which received royal assent back in the 4th of August this year, contains a provision that allows the release date of prisoners to be brought forward by up to 2 days, if doing so would be better for their reintegration into the community. Now, this seemingly small change will allow for the closer integration of prison and the community and will help to secure the vital support needed to stabilise the lives of people coming out of prison. Now, this is by no means the only concrete action that's come out of the ministerial group. On the 20th of May this year, the Scottish Government, in its partnership with the Scottish Business in the Community and the Scottish Prison Service, held a one-day employability summit to promote employability opportunities for people with convictions. The summit brought together key national, local, private and public sector employers, as well as partners within the third sector. Our intention was to help to foster a better understanding about the current employment environment for those with a criminal conviction. And importantly, it also provided a forum for attendees to meet key employers who have benefited from including people from this sector of our communities in their workforce. And it's also provided an opportunity for employers to discuss the barriers that they face in their own line of work and to identify ways in which to overcome them. My colleague Paul Wheelhouse opened that particular event, and I quote his opening remarks. There is clear evidence that gaining employment is one of the strongest positive influences on any individual's chances of desisting from crime. It is common sense that a steady job and a decent wage can change someone's life in the most basic of ways. The summit served as a timely reminder, I believe, that if we can deliver the best possible outcomes for the people of Scotland, we must consider the needs of all of the people of Scotland. A fairer justice system is one which recognises that fact. Doing this means recognising that people with convictions, and most especially people who have served a custodial sentence, are not only likely to carry with them the scars of social inequality, but also to experience further discrimination as they attempt to reintegrate back into their community. That's why my vision for penal reform in Scotland is one which I believe reflects the values of a modern and progressive nation, in which prison, and in particular, short-term imprisonment is used less frequently as a disposal. Where there is a stronger emphasis on robust community sentences focused on activity, addressing the underlying causes of offending behaviour. It's a well-known fact that the prison population has doubled since the late 1960s, and more alarmingly, in my view, that the most dramatic and consistent rise happened during the last 15 years. In just the first decade of this century, the average prison population has rose from less than 6,000 to over 8,000. And whilst we may have seen some recent successes in stabilising that growth, in fact, there have been some signs of a small year-on-year decrease since 2011 at 12, we are a long way from being able to rest on our laurels. In Scotland today, our rate of imprisonment is 144 people per 100,000 of our population. Now, put another way, that means that at any given time, for every 700 people in the community, there is one person in prison. Now, in and of itself, that number may not mean very much, but placed in the context, comparably with other European countries, it makes fairly stark reading. In Ireland, that figure is one person in prison for every 1,200 citizens. In Denmark, Norway, Finland, that number goes up to over 1,600. And it's not just our Nordic neighbours who lock up fewer people than we do. Other than England and Wales, the only countries in Northern or Western Europe with a higher prison population rate than Scotland are the three Baltic nations of Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. Now, I say to you today that I truly believe that there is no good reason why Scotland should have such a high prison population. Of course, for some individuals, people who have committed the most serious offences and those who pose a risk to public safety, prison remains absolutely necessary. But for too long in this country, prison has been seen as the default sentencing option when someone breaks the law. Community sentences are too often portrayed as being the soft option. Newspaper headlines suggest that people got off with a community sentence and will all too readily report how they walked free from court without any consideration of whether custody is actually the most appropriate or effective response to that individual. We need to, in my view, reframe the debate. I have no doubt that in some quarters my remarks tonight will be described as, yet again, soft touch justice. That's an accusation that I will not shy away from, but it's one which I think fundamentally misses the point. For too long, we have been preoccupied with whether we are seen as being soft or strong on crime, when what we really need to be is to be smart on crime. We need to start asking ourselves important questions about what the role of prison actually is. The Scottish Prison Service speak of prison as punishment, not prison for punishment. That's an important distinction. The loss of an individual's liberty is the sanction to be imposed. It's worth noting that it is the ultimate sanction available to Scottish courts, and one which should not be imposed lightly. Of course, suggestions that we lock up too many people and for the wrong reasons are certainly not new. I'm keenly aware that much of this, in one form or another, has all been said before. I can recall, back in the late 1990s, the former First Minister, Henry McLeish, while a minister at the old Scottish office, was calling for the population of Compton Vale to be halved. At that stage, it stood at 250 It's now over 400. In 2008, when the overall prison population stood at 7,500, the Scottish Prison Commission recommended that the government should pursue a target of reducing the prison population to 5,000. Instead, it rose every year for the following 4 years. What is needed, therefore, I believe, is concrete action that starts to change this. I believe we need to act now to achieve the step change that we have failed to achieve to date. And I believe the first steps on that progressive journey have been taken. When I was first appointed as Cabinet Secretary as Justice back in November last year, practically the first paper that was on my desk when I went from Bute House to St Andrew's House was to sign off on the new women's prison, HMP Inverclyde. I decided at that particular point that I wanted to take some time out to consider the proposal before rushing to a decision on the matter, to my officials' frustration. The decision I took not to proceed with building HMP Inverclyde was not one that I arrived at lightly, but it was born out of my desire to use that particular opportunity that had been presented to me as an opportunity to take a step change that I believe had previously been missed. And as I have often learned in politics, those opportunities come along very infrequently. I said at the time we needed to be bolder and more ambitious, that we needed to be smarter with the choices we make and more sophisticated in the way in which we deal with female offenders. In order to do this, I took the time to try and understand the issues in more detail, engaged at both a national and international level with experts. And I believe that the new arrangements that we are planning to take forward truly offer the best support appropriate to the needs of women to help them maintain links with their community. This belief, I believe, is also backed up by evidence. And just this morning, the findings of a review of women's community justice services across the country was published on the Scottish Government's website. This review found that the provision of a flexible and holistic approach can help women to make positive changes in their lives and tackle the underlying issues behind their offending behaviour. It's exactly that type of tailored, wrap-around services, working with women as individuals with strengths, needs and aspirations, rather than simply seeing them as offenders, that I want to see provided within the new custodial estate. And as I said earlier, Scotland has one of the highest prison rates in Europe. Indeed, when we were looking at the options for the women's custodial estate here in Scotland, I was encouraged to look at other countries, in particular the Nordic nations that I referred to. What I found was that whilst many of those countries may have lower rates of imprisonment for women, no country has cracked the provision of truly joined up, collaborative working, which really maximises the potential of the system and, importantly, of the women who come into contact with that system. We're embarking on what I believe is a unique journey, and we have the opportunity to develop a truly world-leading penal policy for women in the criminal justice system. But this isn't just about women. I believe that the steps that we have started to take in relation to the female custodial estate can pave the way for a different custodial approach for all offenders in Scotland. Many of you will have heard me say before, but it bears repeating, short-term prison sentences simply do not work in terms of rehabilitating offenders or reducing the risk of their reoffending. More than this, they actually disrupt family and communities. They Also, can greatly affect an individual's employment opportunity and their stability around matters such as housing. The very things that all of the evidence would tell you are important elements to support the citizens from offending in the first place. There is even evidence to suggest that by weakening social bonds and decreasing job stability, these sentences in some way can actually increase long-term reoffending behaviour. It can hardly be a surprise, therefore, that individuals released from short-term prison sentences are more likely to be convicted than those given a community sentence. That is clearly not a good use of public resources, and in my view, it's also a waste of human potential. There are several important drivers to reducing the use of short sentences. The availability of robust community alternatives is a critical element, and I will go on to talk about that particular facet of the penal system later. However, equally important are legislative mechanisms to influence sentencing decisions. The presumption against short sentences, as set out in the Criminal Justice and Licensing Act 2010, currently provides that legislative vehicle. The presumption against a sentence of 3 months or less has been in place now since 2011. This presumption underlines our intention to move away from short sentences. In practice, however, the 3-month limit has had little impact on sentencing decision. It's therefore my view that more can be done by strengthening this current presumption. So that it is more directed at achieving an impact on reducing short-term imprisonment. I announced in June of this year that I would be consulting on the proposal to further strengthen this particular presumption. This consultation, which I'll be launching later this month, will seek responses and views on 2 main points. First, should the current presumption against sentences of 3 months or less be extended, and if so, by how much? And secondly, is a more radical review of the presumption against short sentences required? These are wide-ranging and complex issues, and I will be encouraging responses and views from as wide a representation of Scottish society as possible. The responses we receive will be critical in forming the decision we take on the future use of short-term imprisonment and the role of prison in Scotland. They will also inform decisions around how we deliver improvements within our criminal justice system, providing genuine opportunities for people to pay back to their communities and to become contributing members of our society. As well as looking at changes, we can also make sure that in the future we should, changes in the future, we should be careful not to overlook the things that we can do now. One of the obvious ways in which we can already start to look at alternatives to the traditional custodial estate is by the use of electronic monitoring. Each day in Scotland, we currently monitor around 800 people, 2/3 of whom are serving community-based sentences, with the remaining 1/3 transitioning from custody to the community. I believe that we can, and I also believe that we should, be doing more to increase this number. In 2013-14, 9 times as many people received custodial sentences of less than 6 months as were issued with restriction of liberty orders. The evidence from other countries shows us that electronic monitoring can help people to maintain connections with their family, their communities, their employment, the very things that short-term sentences are so disruptive of. We also know that the wraparound support services are just as important as the technology itself, if not, in fact, more. We need to move the focus away from the devices themselves and onto the outcomes that they can help us to achieve. In doing so, I believe we can help build public and partner confidence in the use of this particular disposal. Electronic monitoring should no longer be seen as an end of itself, but one which, when set against a wider package of care, can be used as part of a credible community sentence which is effective at reducing reoffending in the long term. We already have the legal framework which allows a person who is subject to a community sentence to have both electronic monitoring and a support package in place as part of a community payback order. This means that right now we can and should be tailoring the use of electronic monitoring within person-centred disposals. We've also taken firm steps to ensure the availability of effective and evidence-based community alternatives, and will continue to promote their use in appropriate circumstances. The community payback order requires people to have committed offences to repay communities for the damage that they have caused by their crimes. Where appropriate, they can combine this unpaid work with structured intervention programmes to tackle the underlying causes of an individual's behaviour. There are hundreds of unpaid work projects taking place across Scotland at any one time, making tangible benefits to local communities. On Friday last week, I had the pleasure of attending the opening of the Dollar Park Walled Garden in my constituency in Falkirk, a fantastic facility for the local community, achieved through some 15,000 hours of unpaid work. And further to this, the legislation enshrines the principle that local authorities should also be consulting their communities on the types of unpaid work to be undertaken by those sentenced to an order. Community payback orders offer real opportunities for rehabilitation. For example, by allowing for drugs or alcohol intervention to be targeted at the offender, forcing them to confront and address their offending behaviour and break the all too common link between drink, drugs and crime. I believe they represent the kind of robust community alternative that can carry the confidence of the public. Of course, any change to the way in which we view and use the custodial estate will not just be about the bricks and mortar. There will also be an impact on the people who work within our prison estate. And I want to take this opportunity to commend the professionalism of the prison service in Scotland. We can and we should be rightly proud of the staff who work in our prisons day in, day out. As I said earlier, prison remains necessary for people who have committed the most serious offences and those who pose a risk to public safety. When such a person is serving their sentence, the education, training and the support they receive must all lead to the very best chance of rehabilitation and assistance from offending. The Scottish Prison Service recognise that it has a key role to play in creating opportunities in custody to help offenders transform their lives, by helping those who want to change and by making that decision to want to change easier for them. And the new model for the custodial estate that I've outlined will also assist us in creating that change in dealing with offenders. In examining the question of how prison sits within the community, it will also look at the role of prison staff. And I would give somebody else into trouble for their phone, but it's my phone. Should I put it on silent before we go any further? I should, if you give it over to me. My apologies. No doubt it'll be my wife saying, when are you due home tonight? Anyway, can I say, we also need to remember that any change to the custodial estate can not happen in a vacuum. And there is a need for change in the wider justice system too. The Scottish Government and partners are currently working together to implement the new model for community justice, a model which has been designed to deliver a community solution to achieve improved outcomes for community justice, to reduce reoffending and to support desistance from offending. I know that my officials are working closely with Apex Scotland, the Community Justice Voluntary Sector Forum and their colleagues to ensure a strong voice for the third sector in this new model. A model which places decision-making locally with those who know their communities best and who are best placed to make decisions that affect them. Collective responsibility through a partnership approach will be vital to its success, and I'm confident that colleagues throughout the justice sector will continue to perform to the high standards to help deliver on this particular vision. As I said at the start of my speech tonight, we as a government will continue to strive to improve the outcomes for all of Scotland. This ethos of improvement is at the heart of the new model, with greater opportunities to share best practice as well as encouraging innovation and evidence-based approaches to service delivery. A set of common outcomes will ensure that we are working together to achieve what the evidence tells us will reduce the chances of a person reoffending and bring improved results for people and communities across Scotland. And a new national strategy for community justice will provide us with a coherent vision to facilitate and drive improvement. Although work on this strategy is at an early stage, three main themes have already emerged. The first is the provision of effective, evidence-based interventions at appropriate points in the system. The second is the need to empower communities to allow them to be truly involved in local community justice matters. And the third is the delivery of improved partnerships, planning and performance right across the sector. This strategy is being developed using a collaborative approach, and the third sector have played a leading role in this work. A new body, Community Justice Scotland, will be established in April 2017 and will work closely with community justice partners, the third sector, and a range of other parties to provide support and leadership for community justice. The Chief Executive of Community Justice Scotland will be tasked with championing the role of community justice on a parity with that of our custodial estate. The body will bring enhanced opportunities for innovation, for the promotion of learning and development, and will provide assurance to Scottish ministers and local government leaders on the delivery of improved outcomes for community justice. Bringing all of these elements together, the new model presents a more holistic and collaborative approach to community justice, which will be driven forward at both local and national level by common aims of securing better outcomes for communities across Scotland. This afternoon, the First Minister described the programme for government as one built on the principles of fairness and participation, which lays the foundations for a country fit for the challenges of the next decade and beyond. It's in that spirit that I want to start laying the building blocks of a penal system which reflects the values of a modern and progressive nation. Blocks laid on the foundations of the hard work already being carried out by our partners right across the justice system. The journey I want to see us take is not one which will be over quickly. Change, real permanent change, does not happen overnight. Each step needs to carry with it the confidence of the people who will be affected by it, from colleagues in social work and the prison service through to those on the bench, to the wider public and beyond. Nor can we go too fast, too soon. We need to walk before we can run, or we risk falling and failing the people who most need our help. What I can do today is to signify my intent by changing the tone of the debate to bringing about a new approach. in 15 years' time, I don't want to look back and say the same things I'm saying today. I want to be able to look back at a period of change and to be able to see the road that we have travelled. I want to be able to see a Scotland in which very real improvements have been made in the use of custody for both men and women. A Scotland with an appreciable small prison population, and a Scotland in which we have redefined what custody looks like. As I said in my opening comments, this is not a road that I can travel alone. Tackling social inequality is a job for all of us, and not just all of us here in this room or our colleagues in the justice sector. We need to empower our communities in the widest sense of the word to bring about truly collaborative partnership working. Thank you.
There will be another opportunity to thank the Cabinet Secretary for his lecture, but we've got some time now to deal with questions. What I find is I usually end up dodging up there because I can't see people at the back, and I don't want to discriminate and just give questions to people at the front. We have 2 roving mics, so I would ask you to put your hand up if you've got a question to ask. Could you say who you are and what organisation or field that you're coming from, just to give the rest of us a little bit of focus? Anne. It's on its way.
Hello. I'm wearing 3 hats tonight. I'm a member of the Apex Board, Chief Officer for Fife and Forth Valley Community Justice Authority, and I'm also the Chair of the Scottish Working Group on Women Offenders. I very much welcome the forthcoming consultation on the use of short-term sentences. Can I ask if this consultation will or can be extended to include the use of remand? Still, 70% of women who are remanded into custody in Scotland do not go on to get a custodial sentence or a prison sentence. And we know that the legislation was introduced in England and Wales recently, often referred to as a no real prospect, significantly brought about a reduction in the use of remand.
My instinct is to say I'm more than happy to look to see whether that's possible and to see whether we can accommodate that in the consultation. The only issue is that we're at quite an advanced stage and about to publish this consultation in the very near future. However, even if it's not within the consultation, that's not to say that it's not an issue that we could give further consideration to and to look at in greater detail. So I'll take your suggestion away tonight to see if that's possible. If it's not possible at this particular stage, then I'm more than happy to look at trying to identify another opportunity for us to consider this issue. Whether it's in another piece of legislation that we'll be consulting on or another aspect of policy that we're consulting on, but I'm more than happy to take that idea away and suggestion.
Hi, good evening. It's Gary Burns from Homeless Action Scotland. Just talking about the Community Justice Bill that's been going through recently. You were speaking about the strategic planning and supporting from the third sector, but at the strategic planning, both nationally and locally, you don't have any expertise from housing or from a third sector charity that would be supporting ex-offenders. And I just wondered if there'd be scope for that to be brought into the legislation, because housing's a really complex matter and all the strategic planners that are on there, none of them have an expertise in housing, and homelessness and poor housing is inextricably linked with repeat offending, and we'd like to see that some kind of scope was given at strategic nationally and locally.
Sure. I can understand your concerns about something that's not provided for specifically in the legislation itself. That's not to say that we can't ensure that it actually happens when it's been taken forward, because it can be dealt with through guidance that we issue alongside the legislation as well. There is always a bit of a risk in legislation if you start listing particular areas that you end up missing out an area and folks say that that needs to be included as well. But what I'm happy to do is to look to see well as a way in which we can try and address the concern that you've raised, both around the housing aspect, which I completely agree with you is an absolutely key aspect in order to help to support and work with those who have committed offences, whether they've been reintegrated into the community or serving a community sentence. But equally is to also make sure that we have very strong partnerships with third sector organisations in developing the approach that's best in helping to address these issues. So I'm more than happy to consider whether it's something that is better suited into the guidance, which may be the case. But I'm certainly happy to make sure that officials have a look at that to see where there's a way in which we can strengthen the concern that you've got.
Hi, I'm Maggie Mellon. I'm a citizen and a member of a number of organisations, but I think I very much welcome everything that you said in your remarks today.
It's a good start.
Yep. I'm going to have a but, of course. Particularly welcome the decision not to build the women's prison. And I think what I was reflecting, though, was that when governments decide to stop doing something like sending people to prison, they can actually do a lot more good than deciding to do a lot of things. So I was a bit disappointed today to read that you were not going to support the amendment to abolish, to raise the age of criminal responsibility for children. Because you talked, I mean, it's at 8 in Scotland, is one of the, I think it's the lowest in the world. And you talked about how important it was for people to have jobs and careers and opportunities in life. We saddle children with criminal records that they take with them into adult life and that stay with them until they're 40 years of age for offences. So, I mean, how you could call an 8-year-old child an offender or any action, it just seems to me wrong. So there's an opportunity to actually take that stain off of Scotland's justice system, and I would urge you to take it at the earliest possible opportunity.
Can I first to say, I recognise the work that you did yourself in terms of the issue around the proposal to build the new Inverclyde prison, Mag, and I met with you and a group of your colleagues who made representation during that particular issue when I was considering that issue. An issue of the age of criminal responsibility. What I can say is that we are looking to take some action on this matter. The amendments as are proposed in the Criminal Justice Bill are not the appropriate way to do it. There's a number of legal issues that we have to address, and there are some other what would be unintended consequences which we also need to address. And the Justice Committee have not had the opportunity to consider these matters in detail. So what we are looking at is looking at making progress on the issue of the age of criminal responsibility with a view to increasing it, but we want to do it in a way which is planned and to address some of the issues that would be some of the consequences of that change. And an amendment at stage 2, simply to make such a change without proper due consideration, is not the most appropriate way to do that. So I've already indicated to the Justice Committee that we intend to consult on this matter with a view to looking at making changes to the age of criminal responsibility. And in that way, we can flush out all of these other issues and to make sure we do it in a planned way and to address any other issues that may come up around it.
There's a microphone on its way to you.
Ross Duker from the University of the West of Scotland. Just following on from that, I'm quite interested to know what you see as the future in terms of youth justice in Scotland, for a fairer Scotland, and particularly the role of the whole system approach for reducing offending among young people. We've recently at the university completed an evaluation of the court support service offered in one local authority to 16 and 17-year-olds and found it had remarkable results in terms of the personal support that the service offered young people, the way in which they were able to make sure they turned up at court at the right time, for instance, and produced bail plans that enabled them to be diverted to a range of services. And it reduced custodial sentences and enabled the young people to have a greater commitment towards criminal desistance. But so often we find that these kinds of services are facing cuts in terms of human and financial resources, and I wondered what you saw as the future there.
Well, it's only a matter of, I think now, some 2 months since I published our Youth Justice Strategy up in Dundee, setting out the approach that we want to see taken forward, and that is very much building on the whole system approach that's been taken forward for several years now. There are no doubts that we can see the benefits that are coming from that. We're now in a situation where we've seen a marked reduction in the number of cases going to children's hearings for offences. We're now in a situation where, having spent some £70 million of capital investment into Polmont, that the place is now half empty, which is a good sign in itself, which is an indicator of the impact that the whole system approach is actually having in working with young people. And what we need to do is we need to build on that and to maintain the achievements that we have already achieved. I think one of the most significant bits of data I saw recently was the number of returns to Polmont, which show that there has actually, I think we're now, there's been quite a marked reduction in the number of individuals who are returning to Polmont from previous periods of imprisonment there. That to me is absolutely key in terms of helping to make sure we drive forward further improvements in this area, and there's no doubt that the whole system approach is helping to support and achieve that. Can I say though, I actually think there are, so in the strategy, the Youth Justice Strategy was set out as the approach that we want to continue and maintain the momentum that we've already achieved in this area. Can I say though that I also think there are lessons for our wider justice system from the approach that we have taken in youth justice, particularly some of the lessons around the whole system approach, and how we can make sure that that good practice, that evidence that we're now building up within the youth justice sector is also being considered within the adult justice sector as well. I don't think we've achieved enough of that yet. I think we can achieve more from it. So building on what we have achieved, maintaining that momentum as best we can with the new strategy, but also looking to learn some of the lessons from the youth justice system that can also assist us with our adult population as well.
Right, there's a question just in the row in front.
So I'm Hannah Graham from the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research at the University of Stirling, and my question relates to your remarks on electronic monitoring and the use of tagging technologies as a community disposal. My understanding is that at the moment restriction of liberty orders and home detention curfews are standalone orders, so they don't typically involve integrated support or supervision unless a concurrent community payback order is also imposed, or unless the person chooses voluntarily to get support. So perhaps you could comment on perhaps your vision, if you're able to at this point, on integrating support services from criminal justice social work or the third sector or both, and how that might look.
I think it goes back to the point I was making about the use of electronic monitoring and the way in which we have to, I think too often the focus is on the device and what the actual device will do, and not enough on what the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve. I was fairly struck, I don't know if there are anyone in the audience was at the event we had in Perth last week, where I launched a paper around electronic monitoring, and I was very struck by the judge from the Netherlands on the approach which they've taken there, where sentencers aren't told that these are the electronic monitoring devices that do X, Y, and Z that you could consider using. What they do is they take them through a process of what you're trying to achieve. And once you get to the end of what you're trying to achieve, it then actually comes up with the provision that's actually necessary in order to achieve that. So you're trying to restrict someone from getting into a particular area, or get them out of a curfew zone or whatever it may be, then you can, the device will then eventually will come out the system as one which will actually achieve that. But what was very clear to me, it was the wrap-around support that goes alongside the electronic monitoring. And in my view, the best way in which to achieve that is a partnership between the local authorities and also the third sector, and what's the most innovative and most effective way to achieve better outcomes through electronic monitoring. I think I think international evidence, I am told, and you probably know better than I, would suggest that our approach to electronic monitoring at this particular stage is fairly conservative and pretty limited. There's much more we can gain from it around how we can work with individuals in the community, and I'm keen for us to explore that much more effectively. But I think in doing that, we also have to recognise that there will be a level of public concern around some of that approach, and we need to make sure that it's an approach which carries public confidence. So, for example, if you get into issues around the electronic monitoring systems not being as resilient as they should be, you very quickly undermine public confidence in their use. So I'm keen for us to take a much more ambitious approach to the use of electronic monitoring in partnership with better wraparound support at the same time, and for that to be delivered between public and the third sector. But I think we should take it forward in an approach which is based on evidence so that we can make sure that we retain public confidence in the rollout of further electronic monitoring.
I'm afraid that's our opportunity for questions gone. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for doing that, and I invite Allen staff to close the lecture this evening.
Thank you, Brian. When we set out to plan the annual APEX lecture, we have a number of overriding principles. It should be relevant, it should be current, and it should take forward the thinking and the knowledge of the justice community. I think that we've achieved that tonight, and I would just want to add my thanks to Cabinet Secretary for taking us into his vision of a justice system which is better than we have at the moment, which is more progressive. A sense perhaps of destination that we don't always get. We sometimes get into a lot of the mechanics of justice, but it's nice from time to time to stand back and have a look at where we're heading and where we should be heading, where we want to go. So thank you. Thank you for framing the debate, for reframing the debate, and taking us into a place where we can start to consider, what are we going to do to make that happen? What are we going to do to make a justice system that Scotland can be proud of? I was particularly struck by the comments that, of course, employment helps desistance. But I would say I would turn that on its head, because desistance also helps employment. And sometimes we can get stuck with thinking about the solutions to problems, and we avoid trying to work out how to stop the problems happening in the first place. So let's not lose sight of all the work which is done to stop people getting into the justice system itself. And maybe it's a good place to start, that whenever you think about the justice system, that the key evidence or the key result or the key outcome of a world-class justice system is you just don't get many people in it. These lectures don't happen without a great deal of work, and I just want to thank Lynn and her team for all of the hard work. Can you give them a round of applause? An enormous amount of fetching, carrying, planning, and huge amounts of time on the phone. I'd also like to thank the staff of the Signet Library, as always, for their wonderful hospitality and the fabulous surroundings. Thank you very much. It only remains to me to thank you all for coming. Those of you that can, I would invite you to stay just behind the screens here. We have a drinks reception. You're very, very welcome to stay and to network with us. Those of you that can't, you've got to be on your way. Safe home, and thank you for coming. Thank you.